But yeah, so let's talk briefly more about this new moon right here. I've gone ahead and highlighted this. This is, again, when the moon is in between us and the sun. I went ahead and drew us a little graphic. I couldn't find anything online that was public domain or free to use that we could substitute here. So I just drew my own. So this would be a situation where we'd have a new moon. Now, I mentioned the ecliptic a little earlier. That's the path that the sun takes across the sky. So I've gone ahead and drawn the sun here, and coming off from either the side of the sun, there's that dashed line. That's our ecliptic. That's the path the sun takes on across the sky. And during a new moon, the moon is usually either just a little bit above the sun or a little bit below it from our point of view. So what that means then is that we just don't see the moon. The sunlight is just going to totally drown it out. It's not up. But the moon also, because it's not directly in front of the sun, it's not going to like block out that light or anything. When the moon does cross that ecliptic, which does happen every once in a while, we get this. It's a solar eclipse. These are pretty rare because all that's happening here is that the moon has moved in front of the sun, in between us and the sun, and it casts a little shadow on the earth. And that shadow is pretty small. So solar eclipses, they happen, of course, but they only happen in each region every once in a while. But now let's talk about what happens when the moon crosses that ecliptic when it's full. So here we're looking at the full phase. This is when the Earth is just perfectly in between the sun and the moon, which means from our perspective in the nighttime, that moon is going to be fully illuminated. Now, when the moon crosses in front of, or not in front of, but on that path, basically what happens is it moves into the shadow of the Earth. If it's not above that line where that shadow is being cast or below it, then it will fall into the shadow just like this. And this is a lunar eclipse. Now, these are more common, and they're more common simply because the Earth is a lot larger. It casts a much larger shadow on the moon, so they happen more frequently. Now, if the moon is entirely in the shadow, if the entire shadow is covering up the moon, then you have a total lunar eclipse. That isn't what's happening tonight, though. We're actually getting a partial that's almost a total. So that partial lunar eclipse tonight is about 99% of the moon will be in that shadow, in that very dark part of the shadow, the umbra. That part that you kind of see just above and below the shadow there, we'll call that the penumbra, and that's where we are more or less right now. The moon is starting to darken, but once we enter the umbra, we'll start to see the red. So let's go ahead and take a look at this graphic here. This is from NASA, and this is for tonight's eclipse. So this is in universal time, but we can see as the moon starts to move into the shadow, it will start to dim a little bit. And then as we move into the umbra there, we're gonna really start to see the round shape of the Earth's shadow cast onto the moon. As we move into the umbra, that's when we start to get that deep red color, which I'm really excited to see tonight. I've seen the lunar eclipse a number of times now, but it's always really, really striking. I remember my first one still, and I wasn't expecting it. I hadn't kept up with the news in the sky at that time. I'd been working actually at a library, and I walk out and the moon is like straight above me in bright red. And I was just for a moment like, oh my gosh, but it was so pretty, right? I was so interested to learn about what was causing this effect. So we have our moment of greatest eclipse, and you can see right there that it is partial. Just at the bottom of that center moon there, you'll see that the bottom sticks out of the shadow a little, and it's a little bit illuminated there still. So that's what we're talking about when we're calling it an almost total eclipse. If it were a total eclipse, it would be completely in that shadow. From there, it's going to move out of the shadow. And yeah, here's just a really pretty picture that I snagged from NASA today of what you can sort of expect with that red color. It really is striking. So I'm excited that we have good skies tonight and can take a look at this. Yeah, so now let's go ahead and talk about what causes that red color. So this is probably the most striking feature of a lunar eclipse, right, is that reddening color. And that is caused by Rayleigh scattering. So this is basically, this is actually a diagram of what we do when we take spectra, when we take white light and put it through a prism. But I think that it illustrates so well what sort of happens to that light. So basically, our atmosphere here on Earth, it has a lot of water, it has a bunch of stuff in it, and that stuff likes to bend light. And remember, this eclipse is caused by the Earth's shadow blocking out the light of the sun from the moon, which would otherwise be fully illuminated because the sun is shining directly on it. Now, because the Earth is in the way, it means that the light that is hitting the moon right now is passing through Earth's atmosphere. And Earth's atmosphere, much like this prism in this diagram, it bends light. And light and colors, they have different wavelengths. So purple, you can see in this image, is a really, really short wavelength, and it bends a lot more. You can see that that purple there has bent the most, and then the blue light bends second most, and then we see like green. But then yellow, orange, and red don't bend so much. So what this means then is that the blue light from the sun's light gets scattered. The purple light is completely scattered. We don't really see green, and all that's left, all that's still hitting the moon through that filter of our atmosphere is the red. So the moon starts to turn red. What I think is really, really cool about this, first off, when we're looking at these lunar eclipses, we're looking at our own shadow, right? That's us from Earth casting this shadow on the moon, which is super cool. But more than that, that red coloration, that's coming from something here on Earth, right? That's coming from a very similar phenomenon, same phenomenon that causes our sunsets to be red. We are actually kind of filtering the moon through all of the sunsets and sunrises on the Earth, which I just think is real cool. So from here, I guess I should check and see if there were any questions. I'm very bad at reading the questions while I'm talking, so I'm going to go ahead and check and see if I had any. Actually, I might have to stop sharing my screen to see any of the questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that share. And there we go. And let's take a look if there was anything. How long does that wobble take? Yeah, so it wobbles throughout the month. So just as the sun is kind of going through its 29.5 day long day, it's also wobbling a little bit from our perspective. Another question we got here is, what does the other side of the moon look like? That's actually a really interesting question. And I think that's something that John is going to go into a little more. He's going to give you guys a Moon 102 talk a little later tonight about geology. But I'll answer it very briefly. If you're really interested and want to see some examples, I would stick around for that talk a little bit later. But yeah, so the other side of the moon, what's really interesting about it is it looks very similar, but there are fewer craters, which is interesting. It's an area of study. You know, people are wondering like, well, wouldn't there be more craters if like the side that's not facing the Earth, you think that that one would get like more collisions? So it's interesting how it looks. If you haven't seen a picture of it, they're really, really, really easy to find. We have sent a few spacecraft out and taken some photos of the other side of the moon. And it's a little surreal to me. It's kind of like if you've only ever seen the northern hemisphere sky and you go to the southern hemisphere and it's like, oh, I'm so familiar with this, but suddenly I'm not. Everything looks a little weird. Same thing with the other side of the moon. It's pretty cool. Another question we got was if I had a favorite feature on the moon that I like to talk about. I don't know if I have like a favorite feature so much, but I do. I contest the man on the moon thing. I've never been able to see it, but what I can see is the rabbit on the moon, which maybe we'll point out once we here. Let me see if we have our stream up on the moon right now. I think that we do. But oh goodness, I actually don't know how to point it out. Um, hmm. But yeah, so this I guess is another thing that you can look up for visualization of. But I've never been able to see the face. I can see like an upside down rabbit, and I just think that that's interesting. There's a lot of cultures too that have a lot of mythology related to rabbits and the moon because they see that rabbit on there. Um, Alrighty. So, is it true that the moon is moving away from the Earth through the years? Yes, it is slowly getting further and further out. As it gets further, it actually gets a stronger tidal locking, which I think is kind of interesting. And then the last question I see here, and it's a silly one, but I like it, so I'm going to answer it, which is what kind of cheese is the moon made of? I mean, it's obviously Swiss. It's got all of the craters and the holes and everything. So yeah, I would say with 100% certainty, if the moon is made out of cheese, it is made out of Swiss cheese. Yeah, okay. Well, I think that that's all that I had for my Moon 101. So thank you guys. I'm going to kind of back out for a second and we're going to let you guys just sort of appreciate that picture of the moon then for a minute.
again, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I am the Public Program Manager here at Lowell Observatory. Thank you for joining us for our Lunar Eclipse stream. As you can see, we're providing you with live views of the moon through one of our telescopes here at the Giovanni Open Deck Observatory. And that is actually why I am all bundled up, is because I'm operating your telescopes tonight. I'm usually the one behind the computers and whatnot. And by the way, telescope domes are really cold. And our Giovanni Open Deck Observatory, everything is out in the open, so it gets chilly. So I will be all bundled up for this. But I'm going to talk not about the eclipse like Rezi was, but it wouldn't be a Lowell moon stream without talking about Lowell's history with the moon, right? And if you tuned in earlier, our historian, Kevin Schindler, and author Dr. Bill Sheehan gave a wonderful talk about how we mapped the moon and what those maps were used for and stuff. But I'm going to take a bit of a different tact here, and I'm going to start sharing my screen right now. Okay, so the tact I'm going to take instead is the artistic side of how those moon maps were created. So just brief overview, if you didn't see the stream earlier, I do highly recommend it. But Lowell Observatory was commissioned by NASA in the 60s to help create maps for the Apollo moon landing missions, and just to have a general geographical map of the moon, which is fantastic. But we talk so much here about kind of the results of that. And the fact that those maps were used to choose lunar landing sites and things, but we don't talk as much about how they got made and why they got made the way they did. So I just want to start with the big question: why were we even mapping in the first place? Because, I mean, simple, and it's kind of what I alluded to, because we needed to put some people on the moon. We wanted to find them a nice flat spot, right? And to put Buzz and Neil down in a nice safe area. Turns out they missed the spot they were supposed to land in, but whatever. So they, that's the biggest reason to map, or at least the biggest reason. That was the impetus for mapping the moon, right? Because we declared that we were going to get to the moon. We were going to get to the moon before anybody else, and we needed to know where to put our people. But another reason, and probably more esoteric reason to map the moon, is for the knowledge of it, right? You, in the process of creating these maps, of becoming intimately familiar with these features, you learn a lot. You are forced to take a critical look at how different things interact. Here, I picked this map. This is one of the maps that was created, one of the LACs that was created. And you can see here on the left side, there's a whole bunch of like mountains and stuff. And on the right side is the Sea of Tranquility, which is much smoother, right? Sorry, which is just, this is where we wanted to put our people down because it was nice and flat. But these, I'm not going to step on John's toes by talking about the geologic features of the moon, but these mare are old lava flows that tend to be less chaotic than the mountains of the moon. And that's something like all of these features, like there's this crazy line right here. I have no idea what this is, but the artist was forced to understand how that line moved across the moon. And that tells a story and gives us access to geological stories that we wouldn't have known without this level of detail. So a good map is a description of features on the surface. It's not an interpretation. It's not your best guess. It is a resource, right? And it needs to be a resource that is accessible. It needs to be uncluttered, and it needs to accurately depict what is going on, right? So, and it needs to accurately depict it in a way that you can understand, that you can access. If you're just standing somewhere with a map, you need to know what it needs to tell you. So you may be wondering, why can't we just use pictures? We had pictures of the moon back then. I'm taking a picture of the moon through the telescope right now. Why can't we just take pictures, slap them together, and make our maps? That's the best way to get an accurate view, right? You don't have any artists getting in the way, doing interpretations of what they think is happening. You can just use a picture. Well, I'm going to attempt to illustrate why we can't just use pictures by the San Francisco peaks just north of Flagstaff. So Lowell Observatory, we are located here in Flagstaff, Arizona. And here is a Google Earth picture I screenshotted of the tallest mountain in Arizona and its surrounding mountains. I don't know about you guys, but I could not tell that was a mountain based on this picture. And it's a high resolution satellite photograph. We have our ski area right here, right? We have all kinds of geographical features, but elevation is not something that's portrayed well in just an image, right? So I can do things though to try to make this elevation pop. I hope this comes through on the stream. This is just a contour map, a shaded relief map of the area, and I can start to see that hey, okay, I understand that there's a mountain here, where maybe I didn't understand that before. And as we add more details, as we add more relief, we can start to see the actual shape of the region. So this is why pictures are not what you want to do, right? Pictures, they're great, but they don't tell the whole story. You really need someone or something interpreting those pictures to create the whole story, right? We have another problem though when we talk about when we are mapping objects that aren't the Earth. And a problem with that is that these celestial bodies, the moon, Mars, Mercury, whatever you're trying to map, vary in how bright they are based on their relative position and our relative position to the sun and how they're getting and reflecting light. So I want to show you, this is just a moon in the first quarter phase. And we're just going to take a look right here. You've got 3 craters and they're just lined up nicely, but they look kind of flat. I don't see a lot of depth. They just look like little ripples. But if I go onto a more crescenty moon, the shadows have deepened, right? I now have a better understanding of these craters. I can see the mountains in the middle. Even this one has a mountain in the middle where I couldn't really see that here. And that's kind of both a blessing and a curse, right? I'm able to get a better view in this one, but I'm not 100% sure which one is real. Are the craters kind of shallow or are the craters deep as suggested by this? So it takes a lot of different views to be able to put together the pieces of the puzzle, right? Okay, so another problem with mapping something that isn't the Earth is the fact that we are stuck on Earth. And when we look through our atmosphere, like Rezi was talking about, that's actually actively turning the moon red, or will here in a minute, that atmosphere can affect viewing conditions. And from second to second, something that you're looking at may look different. We call this atmospheric seeing, and it's that pulsing you may see when we show you our live view of the moon. And I actually snagged this video of the moon through our historic Clark telescope. This is from earlier tonight on that stream I was talking about. And you can see the moon pulsing, right? It's wavering like it's underwater. And as it does that, that changes the view, right? And that's another problem. Some features will look different from moment to moment. So, yeah. So that's why we need artists to interpret this. A human brain and a talented, someone who's talented in these realistic renditions to put all this together and make it nice. Here's another reason that artists are fantastic is they do way better mosaics than computers do. So this is actually Mars, because I liked this picture a lot. And you can see the image on the left here is from Mariner 9. These are direct pictures from a probe that went to Mars. And they're not as good as the artist's rendition. This guy, this person used images taken from this orbiter and at other times as well to make this image that shows, I really like this canyon thing in the middle here. Like, look how much depth, look how much detail you get in the artist's rendition than you get here. It's so flat looking, right? You needed some different lighting, some different just ways of like looking at how these features interact to be able to get what you see here, right? So so computers, so cameras, they're not perfect for this. So Patricia Bridges was the woman in charge of creating these lunar maps, and she's quoted with saying that what she would do to create these maps is she needed a detailed mental image of the feature, and she would get that from different views of that same feature with different lightings, like I was talking about, and by looking through her to the telescope herself. And I'm actually going to skip to that picture here. So this is Patricia Bridges, and here she is sitting at the Clark telescope at Lowell Observatory, actively viewing, getting the best view while she's doing her sketches, right? Because there's nothing quite like looking at it yourself. Actually, they had a direct telephone line from the Clark Telescope Dome to the ACIC, the mapping building, a couple hundred yards away, so that if a particular feature was illuminated nicely, or if the air got really steady and made it really nice to look at one of these features, they would just pick up the phone, call the mappers, and they would hightail it over there to get the views that they needed to create their maps. So I'm also going to spend some time talking about the best time to look at the moon, like Rezi was sort of talking about, because the moon has this feature on it that we call the terminator, and it's a moving target because the terminator is the day-night line of the moon. The sun, so this side right here is being illuminated by the sun, so this is daytime on the moon, and over here is nighttime on the moon. So what we are seeing right here is lunar sunrise. Right here, if you were standing on this crater right here, the sun will be rising and you would start to get kind of a twilight feel as night starts to recede over here. And if y'all have ever been to the Grand Canyon, then you know that the best time to see the Grand Canyon, to truly understand the beauty of the thing, is to go at sunset or sunrise, when you get those nice deep shadows, when you can really see the depth of the canyon, and you don't go in the middle of the day when the sun's right overhead and just kind of making everything look flat. Well, the same thing goes for the moon, and the best time to observe features on the moon is when they're right on this terminator. So I've zoomed in a bit, and you can see the craters lining up here have so much more detail. I can promise you the craters over here are just as detailed or just as dynamic, but because it's close to mid-morning or noon over here, the sun has long since risen, they're flattened out. So that's why Patricia and the other artists, the other mappers, cartographers, I suppose, would go when the terminator was on a feature that they were interested in mapping. So this, I just wanted to show a direct comparison of one of the ACIC maps and just a camera picture taken of this crater Gassendi, I guess. So no single image can create what it took an artist to do. So I always just think that's really cool, just the human effort that it takes to surpass technology and what we need. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen sharing, but that does not mean I am done talking, because I bribed the Lowell librarian who's in charge of our collections, and she gave me permission to take out one of our artifacts. And that artifact is this airbrush. And this is one of the airbrushes used to map the moon. And so you may be wondering, well, why did they use an airbrush? Why didn't they use paint? Why didn't they use pencil? Why didn't they use any of that? And that's because airbrushes give you a really, really even coat. And when you are using just black and white and shades of gray to denote every feature on the moon, you really need to be able to measure every little bit of paint, every little bit of art that is going onto your canvas. And so that's why they had these airbrushes, and I think they're really cool. So the way they work, and I will preface this by saying I have never used an airbrush. So if you are an airbrush aficionado and want to correct me on any of this, please do. And this is a very old model, so I couldn't find, I couldn't find a like a user manual for it. So anyway, so here it is. You can see there is a hose that would come out down here. There's a trigger up here to allow you to control the flow of the ink and really fine. Hang on. So here's your trigger. Here's your airflow. There is a very tiny needle right here. And that tiny needle sits in the paint bucket and basically shoots paint into the airstream, which comes out right here. And that is how you get your paint onto the onto the paper. So I just think this is such a cool artifact because of the technology there. Last thing I'm going to show you, I'll get you back to the moon here in a second. The last thing I'm going to show you is this tool, which I think is equally cool. This is an electric eraser, which basically just forcibly vibrates material off the page to create really, really detailed white highlights in that gray, shades of gray art you're making. So with that, I'm going to turn y'all back over to our live view of the moon, and I can take any questions if people have them. Cool. Doesn't look like there are any questions. So Rezi, I'm just going to turn it back over to you then. And oh wait, hang on. And you can tell us how the eclipse is progressing. And it looks like Leo has a question about erosion, and I'm actually going to let John answer that later because he's going to talk about geology. But Rezi, all you, tell us about the eclipse.
Okay, yeah, so the moon is starting to move into that shadow, and right now what we're seeing is, and you can kind of see this in the live stream, it almost looks like we have a crescent moon. But the crescent moon, right, when we see that as like a moon phase, that's caused by only that little sliver of the moon being illuminated by the sun because it's kind of at an angle. Like if the sun's up here and the earth is here during a crescent moon, the moon is like right here. We only see the little side of it lit up. But tonight we have a full moon, right? The moon is on the opposite side of the earth from the sun. So what is causing that shadow that we're seeing in here right now is Earth's shadow. So just to go through, if you were here earlier, you probably already heard this. But for the new guys, this is the longest near total but partial lunar eclipse since 1440 and will be the longest until 2669. But it is a partial lunar eclipse, which means that it won't be completely in the Earth's shadow tonight. It will, however, be roughly 99% in the Earth's shadow. So it will mostly be in there. Now, as we get closer and closer to near totality, when we get to that 99% covered by the Earth's shadow part of the night, that's when we're going to see that red coloration. So right now it's just looking like the moon is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we go. But once most of the moon is in that shadow, we're going to start seeing some coloration, which is the part that I'm extra excited for. What else? Oh yeah, where it's visible from, that's important. So if you are in North America right now and you have clear skies, you should be able to look up and see this yourself. It's definitely worth taking a look at. I was just, when Sarah was talking here, stealing an opportunity to head out and take a look at it myself because it's pretty cool. You can also see it from parts of South America. You can see it from Northeast Asia, and you can see it from Eastern Australia. So if you're in any of those places and you have a clear sky, you don't need a telescope or anything to observe this one. You should be able to just look up. Now we have a couple of questions that I'll answer, and then we will, I think after this, we get to take another break where we just let you look at the moon, which is great because it looks amazing. But for some questions real quick, why the orange coloration? So that's going to come from the Earth's atmosphere, actually. So the Earth's shadow is falling on the moon, right? That's what's creating the eclipse. But what that means is that the light that is hitting the moon, any light that's left over, is passing through the Earth's atmosphere. And we're basically seeing all of the sunsets and sunrises on the Earth right now projected onto the moon. So that same scattering of light that makes sunsets red, that light is being filtered through the Earth's atmosphere, and that's what's hitting the moon right now. That's what's causing that reddish color. Why is the bottom of the moon cut off of the screen? That just has to do with our telescopes and how much we're zoomed in and our field of view. So yeah, let's see. Why is the eclipse I'm seeing not the same as you're showing? So most likely you're seeing a flipped image. And oh man, I think that Sarah can explain that one a little bit better than me right now. But basically, it just has to do with how we have our setup right now. Yeah, ours is flipped right now. Okay, so why is this one longer? So the length of a partial eclipse has to do with a couple of things. It has to do with how much of the moon is going to be in the Earth's shadow. So for tonight, that's 99% of the moon. That's almost totality, right? So it's gonna be in there for longer than a partial lunar eclipse that would maybe only be like 50% in the Earth's shadow. But also the length that the eclipse takes has to do with how far the moon is from the Earth at this time. So the moon kind of varies in distance. It can be a little bit closer or a little bit further. And the further it is, the slower it's going to move across the sky. So it's pretty far out there right now. And since we have almost totality, it's really going to be going through that shadow for a long time. Total eclipses are still going to be longer. We actually have a longer total eclipse coming up just next year. All right. So yeah, that's my overview. Let's go ahead and let someone else talk for a bit and take a look at the moon right now.
Well, hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this wonderful eclipse that we're in the middle of. We are approaching in about 45 minutes from now, maximum eclipse. So right now we have a nice image of the moon. Oh, just a moment there. Looks like we're just resetting the camera a moment. That should be coming back. Yes, there it is. So we're quite deep into the eclipse right now, and right around 2:03 a.m. Mountain Standard Time here in the US, which is 4:03 a.m. on the East Coast of the US, 1:03 Pacific. That should be the point of maximum eclipse. And this is a 97% partial lunar eclipse. So it's really quite close to a total eclipse. And we're starting to see in the view of the camera that really nice red color starting to come through. So just a beautiful image. I'm certainly enjoying this. I hope you are as well. As we've been talking tonight about different aspects of the moon, we're going to spend some time talking about how the moon moves in the night sky and how that has led to some interesting traditions in astronomy and in cultural astronomy. My name is Danielle Adams, and I work here at Lowell Observatory as one of our deputy directors, but I'm also a cultural astronomer. And so I study how people look at things in the night sky, especially stars. And so we're going to take a look at how the movement of the moon impacts different aspects of cultural astronomy. We tend to focus on the phases of the moon. And so we'll have a little bit of fun here looking at how the moon moves. But before we do that, we'll just keep this view on the moon. All right, looks like we just lost the moon a moment. We'll get that right back for us. Oh, there we go. Okay, well, let me share some things while we're working that out with the moon over there. Just one moment here. All right. So what you should be looking at now is a simulated view of the night sky. And we're zoomed in close here. This is a view of the moon, and you can see the simulated image. The moon is in partial eclipse, pretty well matches where we are right now in the progress of the eclipse. Now, I'm going to zoom out here. And by the way, I'm using a program here called Stellarium. This is a free and open source program that any of you who are watching can download. You can also use it on mobile devices. So it's a really great resource. Now, I'm going to zoom out here so we get some perspective of what's going on. And let me just clear those words out of the way. Okay, so we've got the moon here. This is our horizon. And the moon is quite high in the sky. And this orange line that we've drawn here, this is called the ecliptic. This is basically the path that the moon and the planets take in our night sky. And so you can see the moon is right along this line of the ecliptic. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about here concerning the motion of the moon is that the moon actually moves against the background stars. You might go out at night and see different phases of the moon, but if you look at what's around the moon, you'll see that each night it's a different part of the star field that the moon is residing in. So tonight, if we zoom back in, we'll see that the moon is quite close to the Pleiades star cluster, which is right here. Now, what happens is that the moon orbits the Earth in about 27 1/3 days. And that means that if we take 360 degrees of a circle and divide it by that 27.3 days that it takes the moon to orbit around the Earth, that means that the moon will move 13.2 degrees against the background stars for every 24-hour period. And so if you chop that into 24 hours, then that means the moon is moving about 1/2 degree every hour. The size of the moon as it appears in the sky is 1/2 degree. And so the moon basically moves 1/5 of itself every hour in the night sky. So that's pretty fast compared to the background stars of the sky. And night by night, you'll see that the moon makes progress against these stars. And it completes a full circuit in roughly a month. We'll get more of that later. But something interesting happens in many cultures around the world, and that's that you might be familiar with the solar zodiac, constellations like Scorpius and Sagittarius, Libra, etc. These are the 12 constellations that the sun passes through over the course of a year. And so the constellations are not evenly spaced, but it's often said that the sun spends a month in each constellation. That's not actually true, but on average, 12 constellations for 12 months of the year. So what happens is that you can do the same thing with the moon. So since the moon orbits the Earth in 27.3 days, then the moon can pretty much be tracked as it goes through the sky, and it can be said to stop each night in a different portion of the sky. And so over time, what's developed is a collection of 27 or 28 stars or small groupings of stars that can be called a lunar zodiac. And this is found in many different parts of the world. In India, this is known as the nakshatras. In Arabia, this is known as the manazil, or the manazil al-qamar, which means the stations of the moon. In China, this is known as the lunar mansions or lunar houses. And this goes back even to ancient Babylon, and even is connected to ancient Egypt as well, with the 36 decans, which is a slightly different system, but based on a similar premise. So let's take a brief look at what this actually looks like in the night sky. So I'm just going to make sure that we're here in real time, and there we go. All right. And let's flip back just for a moment to that full screen view of our eclipsing moon. It's really getting gorgeous. And we can see that the moon is just really getting that beautiful red color. It's almost a pinkish color. That very bright portion on the left of your screen, it looks washed out. That's the part that is still fully illuminated by the sun. On the right-hand side, that's the part of the moon that is actually inside Earth's shadow at this point. And again, the color here looks reddish because even though it's technically in Earth's shadow, the Earth's atmosphere is refracting some of the light from the sun around the Earth to go back inside our shadow and illuminate the moon with that reddish color. Really beautiful. So let's take a look at what happens here as the moon moves across the night sky. So if we can go back to the stellarium screen, I just want to confirm. Yes, excellent. So here we've got the moon. And again, this is pretty much right now. The moon is here next to the Pleiades star cluster. But if I go up to my date and time window, I advance us one day. Now we see that the moon is next to the Hyades star cluster here in Taurus, and this bright star, Aldebaran. Now, my expertise is in Arabian astronomy, and this Pleiades star cluster was known as a Thuraya, and it was a really celebrated star cluster in Arabia. Here, tomorrow at this time, for us here in Arizona, 1:30 in the morning, the moon will be near Aldebaran. And that also comes from the Arabic. It means the follower. And it's the follower of the Pleiades because it comes right after the Pleiades star cluster. So then let's say we go another day, right? And so the moon has moved another 13.2 degrees in the night sky. And we see that it's by another star here. And it's getting almost at the level of Orion over here. And so if I continue to advance this, you'll see the moon will go step by step every day, 13.2 degrees. And so the moon, as it's going through its phases, is actually making progress against the background stars of the night sky. So this is the first thing we're looking at here, is the progress of the moon against the night sky. And remember that because that's going to come into play later on when we look at another element. So let's go back to our full screen view of the moon. And we're making really great progress again here. The eclipse is advancing. We've got this really beautiful pink color coming out. It's a bit more pink than reddish orange, and that's because it's still quite bright. And yeah, you can just see beautiful detail on that shadow side of the moon. Beautiful. We really looked out here in Flagstaff, Arizona. The weather forecast was calling for much cloudier skies, and we really ended up with a gorgeous view of the moon. Wonderful. Okay, let's take a look now. We're going to look at another element of how the moon moves, and this is an interesting one. So let me go back to my star map here. Again, I'm using the program Stellarium. That's a free download from stellarium.org, I believe. And let me just make sure I'm at our current time. Excellent. Okay, so again, this is the current view of the moon in the night sky. And the second thing we're going to look at here is that the phase of the moon determines how long the moon is visible in your night sky. And this is going to make a lot of sense. So let's actually start where we are right now. We're looking at a lunar eclipse. And by definition, the moon and the earth and the sun are lined up. And that's called syzygy, when these three bodies line up together. Now, for there to be a lunar eclipse, that can only happen when the moon is a full moon. And so tonight, right now, we have a full moon. And so what this means, if you think about it, and these different celestial bodies in space, this means that as you're looking up at the eclipsed moon if you go outside, for example, then when you're looking at the moon, the sun is directly behind you, right? So the sun is illuminating the other side of the earth right now. It's daytime there, it's nighttime here. And then the moon is passing right behind the earth into our shadow. So some people ask, why don't we have a lunar eclipse every time the moon goes, or every time the moon is a full moon? And the reason is that our celestial bodies have to line up exactly in all of the axes. And so even though every time there's a full moon, we have this event called Sigue, the moon has to also be inside the cone of Earth's shadow. So that means that if you look at the orbit sideways, then one can't be above the other. And so most times when we have a full moon, the moon is a little bit above the plane of our orbit around the sun, or a little bit below, and that's what prevents it from going into a lunar eclipse every single time. So here we've got this full moon, and so by definition, when we have a full moon, it's opposite the sun in the night sky or the daytime sky. So when the sun sets, the full moon rises in the east, and the full moon is up all night long, and when it sets in the west, the sun is rising in the east. Okay, so full moon, you get the moon all night long. Now, what happens in the other phases that the moon goes through? Well, let's find out here. So we're going to go to the very next new moon, or the very next visible crescent after an astronomical new moon. So in our simulation here, we'll just hop over to December 5th and take a look at what we get. Now we're going to have to change our time here. So we'll go through day time. And then we can see here we've got the sun, the moon. Excuse me. Okay, so we'll go to, yeah, this is good, 5:30. This is about 15 minutes after sunset on December 5th. And so you see we've got a moon here, but if we zoom in, you can see that this moon is a really tiny crescent. I mean, it's barely visible. In actuality, you might not be able to see it. It may be too faint. So let's see what happens on the next day, 12/6, a little bit of a thicker crescent. Now, this moon, if you can see the data here on the left-hand side, actually says that this moon on December 6th will set at 7:41. So with a sunset at 5:15, a moon set at 7:41, that means we've got about 2 hours of the moon after sunset, and then the moon's gone. So when we have a crescent moon, the moon is in the sky much less, only a couple hours, compared to a full moon, like tonight, where the moon is up all night long. And so this is a really interesting feature of the lunar phases. And as we go through the phases, you'll see that we've got more moon. So we can advance, say, 3 more days. Now we've got a moon that is 6 days old, and it's going to set at 11 p.m. at night. And so here we've got 5 hours, 20 minutes, something like that, before the moon sets. And so as that phase advances, the moon is up for a longer portion of the night. Now, this feature of, or this relationship of the moon's phases to the length of time that it was up at night actually found itself into a series of Arabic sayings about the moon. So I'll read a couple of them to you, and you'll get a sense here that these sayings are really referring to the length of time that the moon is visible, not as much to the phase directly. So the first one says that when it's the first night, and here the first night means the first night that the crescent is visible. So that technically could be maybe a 3-day-old moon, maybe a 4-day-old moon in some cases. And so on that first night, it's compared to a little lamb, the owners of which have rested in a small tract of sand. And so that means the little lamb doesn't want to wait long before it wants to eat again. And so that's the crescent. It's just a really short period of time. Now, if we fast forward a couple days, then let's see here. Let's try the 5th night. So when it is 5 nights old, then it's the time for discourse and sociability. And so here we're talking about a longer period of time where people can have conversations, maybe it's a few hours. As we progress through the phases of the moon, when the moon is 7 nights old, it's the night of the night journeying of the hyena, which is a longer period of time. And so now perhaps that's a good 6 or 7 hours that the hyena is journeying through the night. When the night is 9 nights old, at this time, onyx is picked up in it. And this is partly because it's so bright, but also because you have plenty of time to search for it. And then when the moon is full on the 10th night, and of course here, this is the 10th night after the crescent is first visible. So this would be a 13 or 14-day-old moon. At this point, then the moon welcomes the dawn. And that goes right back to what I said earlier, that with the full moon, it's up all night long and it sets as the sun rises. So this is just a little piece of Arabian cultural astronomy that talks about how the phases of the moon are related to the length of time that the moon is up in the night sky. So let's go back to our full screen view of the moon and see where we are. And we've got just a small sliver now of the moon, looking gorgeous. Right now, local time here in Arizona, it is 1:40 a.m. Mountain Standard Time here in the United States. So we are about 23 minutes away from maximum eclipse, which is going to be almost a total lunar eclipse, 97% towards totality. And that is just a gorgeous, gorgeous moon. Okay, so we're going to look at one more element here in the night sky, in looking at how the moon travels through the night sky and how that has impacted different cultures. So this is an interesting piece because the moon moves against the background stars of the sky, as we've seen before. And let me get us back to our time right now, and we'll just zoom out. There we go. There's the moon. Get that centered. Okay, very nice. So because the moon moves against the background stars of the night sky, there's something interesting that happens. The moon has this odd 27 and a half day cycle. in terms of how it orbits around the Earth, but its phases take 29.5 days. And that's because as the moon is orbiting around the Earth, at the same time, the Earth is orbiting around the sun. And so by the time the moon has come back to its original place with respect to the Earth after 27.3 days, the Earth has advanced in its orbit over that same period of time. And so the moon needs an extra 2 days, a little bit more than that, to get back to the same point in its phase cycle. And so that difference is part of what causes the moon's phases to progress over the course of months and years as it travels against the background stars. So that means that the moon alone is not very good at predicting annual cycles. If it gets cold every winter, if it rains in the same month every year, the moon alone isn't really good for predicting that because it's too variable. But because, as we saw before, because a crescent moon, a young crescent moon, can only appear low in the western sky, then if you watch actually a star or a star cluster perhaps, and watch how the moon changes its phase each time it passes that star or star cluster, you can use the conjunction of those two bodies to create a seasonal calendar. And this is exactly what some cultures have done. In ancient Arabia, as well as some modern areas like Yemen, Afghanistan, even East Africa, you can find what's called a moon Pleiades conjunction calendar. So again, tonight, if we zoom in here, the moon is undergoing its eclipse right near this Pleiades star cluster. So this is the view now. This is the view tonight, right? And we've got a full moon, which happens to be going through an eclipse by the Pleiades star cluster. Now, if we watched what happened next month in December, when the moon gets near the Pleiades, what would we find? Well, let's take a look here. So I'm going to go, excuse me, 1 month, and we've got the Pleiades down here. So let's back up. All right. So we've got the moon near the Pleiades on December 17th, but here the moon now is 97% illuminated. So this is what we would call a gibbous moon. It's not all the way full. Let's go another month. All right, so this is another month, and let's get the moon near the Pleiades. Now at this point, in January, the moon is now 80% illuminated. This is also gibbous, but if we zoom in here, you can see that it's moving towards a half moon. And so what you'll find is that if we advance month by month by month, every time the moon passes the Pleiades star cluster, its phase gets smaller and smaller and smaller until I'll get to the end here, right at the end of April. And let's center on the moon. Right at the end of April. Oh, and let me change the time. Whoop. Okay, so here we see that the moon is quite close to the sun. And then here at the early part of May, and let's get to nighttime. 1 more hour should do it. There we go. So now we've got a young crescent moon. This is only 2 days old. This is May 2nd, and this will be that first brand new crescent moon that we'll see joining with the Pleiades star cluster. And there we go. We've got the Pleiades there. Yeah, May 1st or May 2nd. They're kind of similar here. So basically, this shows how you can create an entire seasonal calendar just out of the way that the moon joins with a specific star as it goes through its phase changes month by month by month. So these are 3 different ways that the moon moves across the background of the night sky. And these are different ways that different cultures around the world have used these motions to tell time through the night or to tell time through the seasons of the year, all using the changes that we see in the moon. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this view from the Stellarium program, and let's catch up on where we are with our moon. Gorgeous. We're now about 15 minutes away from maximum eclipse, and we just have a tiny sliver of moon left here. Awesome. All right. Well, let me just check here and see if we've got any questions that have come in. Okay. One question, did the Arabs call it the beaver moon too? Nope. No beavers in Arabia. They are indigenous to North America. Let's see what else. There's a question, how much is the temperature dropping on the moon because of the eclipse? So the moon does not have an atmosphere. And so that means that temperature extremes are quite significant. And when the moon goes into the Earth's shadow, you basically lose all of that heat really quickly. So that would be quite a rapid change. All right. We've got some questions. Is this safe to look at? Absolutely. So we're looking at a lunar eclipse here, not a solar eclipse. And that's a big difference. So all the light you're seeing right now on the moon is reflected sunlight. So it is completely safe to look at. You do not need any kind of solar glasses. All right. Another question, why can a lunar eclipse only happen on a full moon? Okay, great question. This is because by definition, a full moon happens when it is directly opposite the sun in the Earth's sky. And so what this means is that for the moon to be opposite the sun, that means it's on the shadow side of the Earth. And so a lunar eclipse can happen only when the moon is passing through the shadow cast by the Earth due to the sunlight that's coming at the Earth. So it can only happen during a full moon. By the same token, solar eclipses can only happen during a new moon because in that case, the moon is on the other side of the Earth, the illuminated side of the Earth, and in a solar eclipse, the shadow of the moon is falling on a much smaller portion of the Earth. All right, and so we are approaching, looks like we're about 12 minutes away from maximum eclipse here, and we're coming at you live from Flagstaff, Arizona, from Lowell Observatory. And wow, we have just got a gorgeous, gorgeous moon here and a beautiful night. another question, how often does a lunar eclipse occur? So it's not exactly regular. As mentioned before, whether we get an eclipse or not depends on whether the moon is passing through what's called the nodes of its orbit around the Earth. So as the moon orbits the Earth, sometimes it's above the plane of the Earth as we're traveling around the sun. Sometimes it's below. So as the moon gets to that point of being full, we only get a lunar eclipse if it's passing through the nodes and it's exactly in the plane of the Earth's shadow. Let's see. Does the moon get as red as Mars? So the color of the moon during a lunar eclipse depends a lot on local factors. So it can appear as red as Mars, absolutely. It depends on things like particulates in the air. If you have air that has some smoke in it, you'll get a much deeper, darker red moon. Whereas if you have, say, a lot of water vapor, that will affect the color in other ways. So it can get as red as Mars, and ours is currently looking rather pinkish, which is quite a beautiful color, I think. All right. All right, so I'm going to sign off myself here, and we are going to welcome back Rezi and Sarah, I believe, together to give us an update on how we're doing and what's coming up next as we approach maximum lunar eclipse.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm on yet. Sorry.
Yeah, I can talk a bit about, because I've got my eyes on the moon as well as the camera you're seeing. Yeah, it looks real nice. It doesn't, from your eyeball, look this pink. I'm intentionally overexposing it so in the camera so that you can see some of the detail in the features on the moon. It's actually much darker. It is that orange color, that darker orange, and even pretty dark gray that people were talking about earlier. So I think what we're going to do now is toss it over to John Compton, who will talk a bit about some of the geology of the moon, and we'll keep him apprised and let him know when we're hitting maximum. John, are you ready? Just about? Maybe.
We do have a minute maybe while John's getting ready here.
Oh yeah, never mind. He's got 10 minutes. That's my bad.
I think we had a little break in there for a second, but things got a little turned around. But
yeah, sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, so I just snuck outside to take a look at this, and you're right, it doesn't look quite as pink as it looks in the video that you're taking right now, Sarah. But you can definitely still make out some of that coloration, which is really, really nice from here at least. So yeah, you can tell that we're getting really, really close. I'm interested to see how much is left of that little tiny sliver of very illuminated, that like 1% of the moon that's going to be still illuminated tonight. I haven't seen an eclipse quite like this before, so I'm excited.
Yeah. And sorry, John, I realized it's about time for us to take just a little moon break. It's not quite time for you yet. That's my bad. I got my times mixed up. So what I think we'll do is we're just going to let you watch the moon, and we will pop back on in about 5 minutes when we hit maximum, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then after that, if you want to hang out with us and watch it sort of recede from maximum, John's going to talk a lot about some fun geology stuff about the surface of the moon. So we will let y'all just enjoy, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes. Hey, everyone. It is now 2:02 in the morning, at least here in Arizona. If you're on the East Coast, you might actually be up for like a real reason. But 2 in the morning is just a weird time. But anyway, we have now reached maximum eclipse. Rez, you want to talk about what that means and what's going to happen next?
Yeah, so basically what's happened here is we have entered into, well, the moon has entered into the Earth's shadow as much as it is going to tonight. So tonight, right now, we're at about 99% of the moon is in that shadow. And what we're seeing for the most part here is this pink color, right? This happens with lunar eclipses. And what's happening is the light that is hitting the moon is being filtered through the Earth's atmosphere, right? The Earth is perfectly in between the moon and the sun. So normally the moon is, when it's full, white because of that sunlight reflecting back from the sun onto the Earth. Today, though, that sunlight isn't hitting it directly. The Earth is in the way. So that light is being bent and we're seeing all of this red. Now, since this is the furthest into the shadow that the moon will be tonight, what that means is from here, we're going to pretty much see the reverse of what we just saw. It's going to start getting lighter and lighter. That illuminated patch is going to get bigger and bigger, and it will go back to regular, normal moon colors pretty soon. So yeah, that's what's happening right now. Actually, I'm not on Mars Hill right now where the observatory is, but in my own little neighborhood, I just took a peek outside, and it's very cute. Like all of the neighbors are outside looking at the lunar eclipse. So I think pretty much everywhere where people can go outside to look at this right now, they're taking a look, and they should. It looks really, really nice.
Yeah, and you can pause the stream if you need to. Like I do advocate it if it is clear where you are. You can pause the stream, go take a look, make sure you see it for yourself, and then come back and you can hear us talk about other stuff. We've got about another half hour, well, not even quite, 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes of talking to do, and then we'll probably go to bed after that. But for now, I think we will turn it over to John, who's going to talk about some geology shenanigans on the moon, and really whatever he wants to talk about. So have fun.
Hey, thanks. Hey, nerds. Thanks for joining us, at the end of the stream. So definitely throw all your remaining questions in the chat, and I'll try and get to whatever I can, whatever I know about. Most of my knowledge of the moon is the features we see on the surface and the geology, but I can touch on some other stuff if we need to. It's a gorgeous looking eclipse right now, so I don't want to use a presentation or anything. Let's just roll that beautiful moon footage, and I'll tell you a tale of the moon. This whole story, how the moon formed in the first place, is a lot of what we see on the surface. So about 4 billion years ago was the Hadean time period on Earth, right? 4.5, somewhere around there. Right. And Earth was basically just a ton of lava and lightning. So appropriately named the Hadean time period. Right. It was partially differentiated, which means, it started to separate into layers and things like that. And along comes this huge, other body, right? This thing the size of the Mars, right? And it's called Theia, right? Which is the name for the mother of the moon in old mythology. So it comes along and it sideswipes Earth, right? And it just blasts a big old stream of just Earth off into space, right? Glancing blow, and it kind of keeps going. So this stream of debris, this stream of molten bits of the Earth itself sort of formed a ring around the Earth for a while, until it started to condense back down and coalesce, coming together as the orbit as the rings kind of caught up to each other. And that accreted, it formed together into the moon, right? So the moon was a piece of the Earth at one point, but it wasn't like a chunk of the Earth. It was bits of molten earth that were splattered off into space and then kind of like coalesced in this ring. There's a couple other theories, but this is the one that has the most amount of proof behind, right? It has the most traction, I suppose. So this piece of the earth that once was, when things accrete, right? When things come together like that, they get really, really, really hot, right? And so the moon was also just a giant ball of lava at that point. Something like 10,000 degrees Celsius, right? Hot, 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 hot. And, it remained molten for a really long time. And when it had formed really close to Earth. That little small moon around the moon. I will touch on that. Good question. Thank you for the questions. The moon was like a tenth the distance that it is now. So like the moon was right in our face. And so this gravitational pull from the Earth. So the moon is lava, right? Earth is lava, but it's bigger lava. And it basically stretched out the moon towards us, right? So the axis is kind of pointed our way, and it's not a huge amount, but it's basically a squished little football shape, and we're looking at it. And this is, caused a lot of the effects for how we got tidally locked and things like that. So the moon is still just a big ball of lava, though. And over time, things start to cool, right? And you start to cool these things like olivines and pyroxenes, like these heavy, they have like a lot of iron in them, a lot of magnesium, things like that. They're almost all silicates. So they start to crystallize and sink as they cool because they're heavy. And they form like this little mantle area down there. It's still pretty ductile. And then, over time, we get like these feldspars, anorthite, or anorthitic rocks start to cool, and they float to the surface, right? And you can see it on the moon. When we talk about like the highlands or those high areas, the white areas of the moon, we're talking about that anorthite that floated to the surface like a foam, and it kind of cools and solidifies into these cool ranges, right? So why do we see the other, the darker materials, right? That should be that iron rich, should be basalts and the olivines and things like that, probably not the pyroxenes. The late heavy bombardment happened, right? So we started getting all of these impacts all over the Earth and all over the moon, and big impacts, bolide impacts, all across the surface. And you can see them in these dark patches. These impacts hit, but it's still a pretty ductile moon. It's still pretty soft and squishy inside. And so we get a lot of lava, right? A lot of these sort of like, what do you call them? Like really, really liquidy flood basalts kind of start flowing out and filling in the areas. They fill in all the low-lying spots, right? So it takes a bit to cool, and it's very, very liquidy. Miss Mossmo, yeah, so is the Earth. It's awesome. The question was, wait, the moon used to be a floating mound of molten rock? Yes, indeed. These low-lying areas caused by the crater impacts and some other ones in certain areas filled in with lava, like an ocean of lava, right? And we call them the Mar, right, which means the seas, right? So you get like Sea of Tranquility, Sea of Rains, Ocean of whatever, right? They're all named after oceans. And they were, for a long time, oceans of heavy metal lava. And they kind of smoothed it out and filled in the cracks. And you can even see in this image some little embayments, things like that, as it made little coastlines and things. And it filled in the areas, and that sort of like anorthite, that soft foaming sort of material that crystallized first or crystallized later onto the top, you can see them poking out in little island chains across the surface. So we get the late heavy bombardment, we get all these lava flows, right? And the moon is still cooling, so we start to get some other interesting features. One of them is you'll get these like little track lines kind of going across. They look like little railroad tracks everywhere. And these are from the moon, like the moon surface shrinking, right? And it kind of shrinks in, but there's nowhere to go. So it just kind of forms little cracks in these little zones. But then the big one, right? The big features are the new impacts, right? These more recent ones. As you can see, one down there at the bottom. You see Tycho and Copernicus pretty well right now, and these are more recent impacts, right? So they're not filled in with lava. It's not that the basalt was excavated during these earlier impacts. It's they were filled in, but now that the moon is cooled, right? It's pretty solid, except for maybe a molten-ish core of iron. I think it's a little bit debated, but these new impacts don't excavate anything; they just hit, right? And you'll see all of these ejecta lines kind of streaming off from the impact site. You can really see it well with Copernicus down there. So these ray lines are how we sort of track the ages of some of these impacts, because they lie over each other and they'll fade over time, and we can sort of see which ones happened when. But for the longest time, a lot of these craters were thought to be volcanic, right? They look a lot like a caldera. A caldera is just kind of a collapsed volcano, or a collapsed, what do you call it, mass of something underneath the surface that didn't quite breach the surface, right? And it cools, and so it collapses on the surface. It looks a lot like them, right? We see a big ring. We see terracing along the inner edges of the ring, where it's sort of collapsing in this little stair steps. And then we see in the middle this sort of resurgent peak, right? And so people thought, oh, that's a caldera. But then when we started doing research about these sort of the heavy bombardment and seeing like how big these impacts really could be, because people thought, oh, they must be side glancing, it can't be like that. But no, these were energetic hits. And so the terracing is as it sort of like collapses in on itself. And then the resurgent peak is that, you know, some of these things hit so hard, it compresses the ground in these huge areas, and it ripples the ground like it's water, and it kind of gets stuck, basically. There's some other features where it kind of pops itself back up, but we get these really, really cool craters. I know there's a question earlier about erosion on the moon. Yeah, the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, and because it's completely cooled, there's no tectonics anymore. So we don't really get the same types of erosion, right? There's no wind, there's no water, and there's no tectonics for mass motion, so nothing's kind of getting big and falling apart. It does still get impacted, and so we can get local erosion from an impact and it kind of moving off. Yeah, so we'll get bits of erosion like that, but the regolith on the moon is really spiky, sharp little grains. The regolith is basically like the sand of the moon. And so they tend to be little spiky ones because there's nothing moving them around to round them off over time. So they kind of stay put. I'm gonna look through the questions real fast while I've got a sec, before I move on to some of my other favorite lunar features. Thanks for sticking around, you lunatics. Let's see. So I don't know a lot about this other small moon that's been in the news. Couldn't really tell you. I don't believe that it would have much of an impact on like tidal effects and things like that. And one of the, there's always the question of like, if the moon is leaving us, what will happen to our tides? And the sun also has a decent amount of tidal effect on the Earth, especially from a geologic standpoint. So, we'd still have tides. They'd just be solar. Don't know when that is. So what are the darker areas of the moon composed of? And are those leftovers from when it crashed into the Earth? So the dark parts, again, are those lava fields. It's the inner surface of the moon remaining liquid for so long that it sort of sprung out of these big crater impacts like an artesian well, just like trickling up and out, and kind of filling it in. In some areas, you can see what looks like wave patterns forming. Those are more of those wrinkle ridges where it cools and kind of deforms, because the highlands are gonna shrink in different ways than the Mar, and so you kind of get this ripply effect. They look cool though. They definitely make it look like an ocean. Let's see what else we got. Could we have asteroids from the Earth Gaia splat hiding out in space? Bits of each more and less mixed. Yeah, probably. It would have been a very, very energetic hit. It would have been something like an object 90% the size of the Earth hitting the Earth. Some stuff would have been shot out. Who knows what would have come back by now? And who knows what's still out there looming in the distance as a signature of Earth. If someone were on the moon right now at this point, what would they see from their point of view? I think they'd see sort of a solar eclipse, probably. Yeah. That's my guess. I'm a rocks guy. How do objects like moons and planets end up perfectly round? It's just gravity, right? So things want to be evenly distributed. Like, so if I build a sand castle, eventually it will kind of fall down and flatten out. And if you do that from every angle, it just becomes a ball. It's just falling in from all over the place. Is it true that the moon is female? Yeah, traditionally it said Luna, the goddess moon and the god sun. I don't know why. Yeah, so the Earth used to have a ring. Especially had a ring of bits of moon, which were bits of Earth. And even from a solar perspective, the moon is basically touching their Earth. It's really close. Like 250,000 miles isn't much. That's how far a Jeep Liberty can drive in its lifetime. Like, it's like right there. And even, at the beginning, 25,000 miles away, it's right on top of us. It's a bit of us. Let's see. Erosion, mini moon. The moon would have had small tectonics at one point. Not in the same sense that we have, where we have these huge plate motions, but just as the surface shrunk, there would have been a small amount of motion. Now, a lot of that is mostly detectable in those wrinkle ridges and things like that. But we do have a fair amount of grobens, like these horse and groben structures, which come from like pull apart features. And so the only way to get pull apart features is to have like regional tectonics going on. Have these impacts affected the rotation motion? Probably not to a detectable degree, but everything has an impact, especially meteorites. Okay. I did not. Thank you, Dulcimerist. Is the moon ever going to disappear? So the moon is leaving us, but it's not leaving us quickly, right? It leaves at about the rate that your fingernails grow. So every time you clip your nails, think, oh, goodbye, moon, a little bit further away. But that's slowing down. So eventually it will, it will continue to slow down, and it will find some sort of equilibrium distance away from us. We'll get less wobble. It'll be like truly tidally locked, and it'll be kind of this far away distance as it kind of orbits around us. Can the moon crash and wipe us out? Oh, I hope not. No, absolutely not. We are trying to throw it away from us as hard as we possibly can. But Earth's gravity kind of is pulling it towards us, but Earth's gravity is losing that fight, and it's slowly leaving. Nothing's going to change that. When was the last meteor impact on the moon? All the time, like all the time. Little tiny guys. I think the last big one was probably Copernicus or Tycho, because those are the ones with the most sort of vibrant of the ray patterns coming out of them. I don't know much about moonstone. I think it just looks like the moon. Is the roundness of the moon an optical illusion? We see a round ball because it's the simple shape we want to see. No, it's pretty round. And the deformation that makes it a football is aimed at us, right? So if you could get around to the side, in theory, if you had good instruments, you could see that it's sort of this oblate, sort of spheroid kind of shape. Have you ever seen asteroid impacts from your telescope? Not me. I'm not cool enough. So some other interesting features. I've got my little notes here. We've got all of these little bays in the lunar highlands. And if you take even your own telescope and go look on a clear night, you can see a lot of these interesting features. The impacts. There was a question about the other side of the moon, like the dark side of the moon, and what it looks like. So it's heavily impacted. But this side of the moon has all of the Mar, right? And a lot of that is gravitational pull, right? Magnesium, iron, heavy, and they kind of bubbled up into these really early, huge impacts. And the sort of like that, we call it like this ductal mantle area is a little bit offset towards us, and so it kind of pops out a little bit easier. The dark side of the moon looks just like a big piece of pumice. It's got that mostly anorthite, right? So it's just white rock with tons of craters in it. Why are most impact craters on the side of the moon that faces us? It's pretty well distributed, I'd say. I feel like the backside, if you look at it, you can see it's pretty beaten up. It's had its fair share of impacts coming in. Does the moon spin? It does, but so do we, right? And it rotates around us at the same rate that it spins. That's that tidal locking thing. So it's rotating, but at the same rate that it moves around us. So it's almost like it's keeping one side always facing us. And that's partially to do with some fun physics, and partially to do with it's got an offset sort of core, and it's got this stretched out phase. So if you remember Weeble wobbles, it's kind of like Weeble wobbling at us. They just don't fall down. So some people believe that there are other theories about how the moon was formed, but a lot of the proof of why the moon came from Earth is and someone just asked that exact question. It is compositionally almost identical, especially to the time period when the moon was formed. I think that's most of the questions. So I appreciate your time. Ask me fun things about my favorite little piece of the Earth up there.
Okay, thank you, John. So I believe it's now time for us to wrap up the stream. Not that the eclipse is ending, but we're tired and we want to go to bed. Rezi, do you happen to know, we had a question of when the eclipse ends. How much longer has it gotten it? Do you happen to know that?
So about the exact same amount of time as led into it. So if you were watching from the beginning of the stream, I think we started how long ago now?
That was hours and change ago. So it's probably got about 2 hours to go out of the partial, and then they'll have a little bit of penumbral residual, but that's hard to see even at the best of times. So the good part will probably last another hour or two.
Yeah, which is cool. That's one of the cool things about this one, is that it's very long for a partial eclipse, which makes it pretty neat.
Yeah. So I think with that, guys, we will bid you farewell. Thank you for joining us on this early morning or late night, whatever your life's about. And we will see you on our next stream. So have a great night, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much for watching.